Hello, everyone. My name is Anne Emmanuel. I am the Executive Director of the French-American Chamber of Commerce in San Francisco. I am thrilled to welcome you to this first edition of our second season of the live panels, France versus Silicon Valley. Our topic today is Aerospace Race for the Stars, the new challenges of the space industry. Just as in season one, we're partnering with the magazine Challenge, represented today by its editor-in-chief, Gilles Fontaine, who will be moderating this session. And we are extremely lucky this morning or this afternoon, depending on which side of the Atlantic you are, to have two amazing speakers, François Chopard, founder and CEO of Starburst Aerospace, representing the French side, and Pierre-Damien Vaujour, co-founder and the CEO of Loft Orbital Solutions, representing the Silicon Valley side. Before we start, I'd like to extend our thank you to Bank of the West, a longtime support of the French-American business community and sponsor of this event. As a non-profit, non-governmental organization, we rely on our members and sponsors to fund our mission of building bridges between the French and American communities. So this event would not be possible without them. So once again, thank you. Just a final word to tell you that everybody is on mute. But you're more than welcome to ask your question through the chat. Hello, everyone. I can see quite a lot of hellos there. And your questions will be relayed by Gilles during the discussion. So Gilles, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Emma. And we're very pleased to have you, to see you again for this second season of our series, France versus Silicon Valley. Actually, it's more like Lisbon versus Silicon Valley tonight, or this morning, because François, one of our two speakers, is actually right now in Lisbon for the Web Summit. He will tell us more about that later. Pierre-Damien, you are in San Francisco, so not quite in the Silicon Valley, but not very far from Silicon Valley, and that's where most of the action is taking place right now. So actually, I also wanted to apologize, but yes, Dennis, I see your message, and you ask for a French conversation, but we're doing this in English from the start because we are very polite in France, as you say, as you know, and we. Even if there was only one English person in the room, we would do this in English so everybody can understand. And I'm sure you will be very able to follow our discussion, around 1 hour discussion. So our two speakers, thank you, Anne Emmanuel, for introducing our two speakers tonight. We'll be talking about the big challenges, new challenges of the space industry. And we have wonderful speakers with us tonight. Pierre-Damien Vaujour is the co-founder and CEO of Loft Orbital. He's living and traveling between, Toulouse, San Francisco, Paris, whatever. You also tell us more about that later. And maybe I wanted to start with you, François. You've launched quite a few years ago, and we've known your story from the start here at Challenge magazine. You started Starburst, maybe a dozen years ago, and it was really the very first incubator dedicated to aerospace startups. Can you tell very short few words about your story and where you are right now, and what you're doing, by the way, in Lisbon for this Web Summit?
Yes, Gilles, thanks for the audience and the time. I'm Pierre-Damien, and nice to be talking with you. Yes, I'm in Lisbon just for a couple of days. Web Summit, as you know, is one of the biggest startup concentrations, not only in Europe, but in the world. And we'll be talking tomorrow about a very similar topic. Starburst was created almost 10 years ago now. At that time, SpaceX, we barely knew SpaceX. Planet Lab was slowly emerging, and startup in aerospace, aviation, space, and defense was almost an insult. And nobody would believe that the startup would be successful, would be able to raise capital. And so when we started our company and business with the vision to support startups to grow their business and fund them and help corporates understand what was going on, what was the disruptions that were about to arrive. Everybody told us that we were crazy, but now it's make more sense. We are maybe a little bit early, but at least it allows us to understand better the needs from the startups and the corporates. We expanded our business in the US in 2015, in Singapore in 2016. Now we are in about 10 different cities, a little bit less than 100 people. We have incubators, in different cities, including LA, Paris, Tel Aviv, and Singapore. We still run our global accelerator where we take 25 startups per year. We take equity and we bring them from seed to Series A. We just had our first unicorn and IPO in August with a company named Momentus. It was a little bit complicated, but they made it, and so we're very happy about that. We are preparing our second unicorns and second IPO with another startup that we can't talk about it right now. And so, now and in the last 12 months, we've seen more than 25 unicorn, and thanks with the SPAC trends in the US, we've seen much more unicorn and an IPO either on the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange than we've seen in the last 20 years. So it's the right timing to talk about it. And so thank you again, Jill, and I'm sure we're going to have a great discussion today.
Thank you, François. Thank you. Pierre Damien, same for you. Where do you come from? Where are you heading?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me today. Very excited to be part of this panel with François. So my background is more in the regular aerospace engineering world. I started working more like the European Space Agency, NASA, and some other, what people would call regular space agency worlds, before going to the, more recent world of like startups and things like this. The one thing that, the vision behind, starting Loft Orbital was really the realization that until now, like space is really limited for, government programs, large organizations. And while, everybody is using it on a daily basis, when you think about your GPS, your weather forecast, Google Maps, anytime you watch like cable TV, all those kind of applications, those are things that you're using every day, but nobody's really aware of this. And nobody's really can take advantage of it, as long as we're going to live in the paradigm where if you want to do something with a satellite, you have to know how to build a satellite, how to launch a rocket, and things like this. So the vision behind Loft, the reason we started Loft, was to say, what we would like to do is have a universe in which you can deploy assets in space, like deploy camera in space, radio in space, whatever you think is reasonable or useful, and be able to do that in a way that is very simple. So that's why our motto is make space simple. And that's really the vision for us. So really changing the way people can access space by allowing everyone to very simply really use cameras, radios, and any other kind of sensor in space. So that was the vision behind Loft. And to get there, we've assembled a pretty large team. We're a bit short of 100 people. We're between Toulouse, San Francisco, and Colorado. So we're very much between France and Silicon Valley in that sense. And we've been developing a lot of software products. So really try to be bringing software engineering to the aerospace engineering community to be able to scale and provide the solution in a way that is way faster, way more reliable, and way simpler than what has been in the past. So I'm happy to go into more detail maybe later in the conversation today around what is exactly that we do from a software standpoint. We're essentially allowing anyone to command and control a satellite from the ground without having any knowledge about the satellite themselves. So to me, that's really exciting. We've kind of built that product that lets you use any satellite in any way without any need to know anything about space.
Okay, Pierre Damien, thank you very much for this introduction. And by the way, do not hesitate to ask your questions either in French or in English, and I will pass them on to our two speakers. The first question would be very basic on the basic trends of the industry right now. Behind the big scene of these billionaires, spending billions of dollars or dozens of billions of dollars in their space race, very spectacular events and so on. What's cooking in the space industry right now? What are the big trends? François, you wanted to start?
Yeah. We've seen a couple of trends. First is about the launch. You are talking about SpaceX, how to bring the cost, to bring a payload or kilograms from Earth to low Earth orbit or further down. And SpaceX has done an incredible job by reducing the cost at least by 10. And with their new vehicle, Starship, that should fly either by the end of the year or next year, that should reduce even more that cost, which means that we're going to be able to do more stuff in space, send more things, build more space stations at a lower cost. That's the first thing. And in that race for new launches, we've seen Blue Origin, but we've seen a lot of new players. Rocket Lab is already one of them. ABL made the news recently. They just raised 200 million. But you have also, and they are basically all based in Los Angeles for some reason. But yeah, the launcher market is bubbling, and we've seen emerging player in Germany and in France. We are trying to build that ecosystem. We are right now incubating two launcher startups, one called VOS, Venture Orbital System. They are based in Reims, and we are also investing in another one, which is hybrid, and they are based in Bordeaux. But we are late. Basically, if we talk, France versus Silicon Valley, or in that case, Los Angeles, we are late in the game, but we are trying to catch up. That's I would say the first trend. There's a couple of other trends, which is, now they're building a huge constellation for Earth observation. Planet is the leader of them, most advanced in the visible area. There's a couple of other constellations working in the radar. It's called SAR area. So and a couple of more, and then we are talking about communication constellation. Again, SpaceX and with their Starlink constellation is also making the news. Kuipers will be launching soon. We talked about OneWeb, also out of UK. And we heard recently that Greg Weiler, the founder of OneWeb, that is not part of them anymore, wants to launch a constellation with 320,000 satellites. And so it's not the 4,000 satellites from OneWeb. It's not 40,000 satellites from Starlink, but it's more than 300,000 satellites. So it's really happening. And then when you look at NASA, they just launched a bid, looking to find consortium or players to take over the International Space Station, and at least 12 consortium, applied to take over the space station. And we just heard recently that two of these consortium are starting to build their own. So yeah, definitely there's something happening. Jeff Bezos built his rockets, thinking that in the near future there will be 10,000 people living in space, manufacturing in space, and doing many other things. So yeah, definitely much is happening here.
Pierre, Damien, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think it was great to hear from François, kind of like the whole spectrum of things that are happening in space. Maybe for me, I would focus on maybe just two trends. The largest one, in my opinion, is the emergence of what people call mega constellation, which is what François was referring to with the companies like OneWeb and SpaceX and Kuiper that are launching, thousands of satellites. And what the other trend to me is maybe not so much of a space trend, although it is related, is of course the increased awareness and interest into addressing the climate change crisis. And most of the data that we're using for that is coming from space, right? And so clearly there has been more and more awareness of this. There is the COP conference right now. This is in the news every day. And I think to some extent what Loft is trying to do is realizing that, gee, you do have thousands of satellites for communication purposes that are mass manufactured in factories like cars. And then when you want to launch one satellite to observe, the climate, the weather, or any phenology on the ground, it takes NASA 10 years to build it and like tens of millions of dollars, right? And as long as that's going to be the case, we're going to be limited in our ability to really collect data about the Earth. And so, in that sense, that's what Loft is trying to provide, is the ability to really use those mass manufacturing capability and just deploy any Earth, climate monitoring instruments in space. So we really changed the ability that we have to know what's going on the ground. And I think one of the reasons it's important is as long as you don't have like very clear data around what is happening, where and when, it's going to be extremely difficult to enforce any regulation, right? People talk about, oh, great, like China is going to limit its CO2 or methane emissions. Great, but how do you measure that? How do you enforce that? And if you cannot measure it, it's going to stay like declarations. So while it may not be like a space trend, so to say, I think the use of space to be able to address the biggest challenges we're facing here on Earth is more and more something that we see of an interest from everybody.
François, you mentioned the fact that Europe was really late compared to, of course, what was happening on the West Coast. Could you comment on that? Could you?
So of course, timing is good. Macron with his France Industry 2030 announced, big investment, 30 billion. A part of this will go to deep tech, will go to hydrogen. We are talking about environment, hydrogen for aviation, which is another part of aerospace that is booming right now. And he talked about 1.5 billion euro for space. And so we are discussing right now with the government, with the prime minister, and the different others, government entities, how to deploy best, that amount of money, because definitely we need that if we want to grow the French ecosystem. Right now, there's barely any money for deep tech and for these early stage startups. And if there's no money for deep tech, there's no money for aerospace and in particular space. And without going that far, without going all the way to California and Silicon Valley, just looking at Germany, they have been much better than us. Launching ISAR, which is a Munich-based launcher company, RFA, which is a spin-off of OHB. Also in Germany, there's a couple of other projects. They raised already 100 or 200 million. So it's possible in Europe. It's just that we are struggling in France. And in France, my explanation, without involving the government too much, and is that we have these big players. We have Airbus, we have Ariane, we have Thales, we have Safran, and we're in each market that is about to be disrupted. The legacy players are always pushing back for this type of innovation. They want to do that by themselves. They want to do continuous improvements, and so. As a result, emerging startups have difficulties to be created and then to rise. We have Preligence. They wanted to build an Earth observation constellation, but they did not succeed to raise enough money, and so they had to pivot and do more software-oriented AI for intelligence based on Earth observation data. We have ExoTrail. That is just focusing on propulsion for small satellites, but we don't have these big players. Now that we've launched our incubator Blast, with Onera, BPI, Polytechnique, and the Saclay, ecosystem. Now we think we have more chance, and we just signed an agreement with the Agence Innovation Défense. We signed an agreement with the Commandant de l'Espace, with the CNES. With MBDA and a few other players, but we are still late. And then when you look at the different round of financing that are available, you can raise a couple of millions in Paris or in France, but when you are looking at that 10 million rounds, there's not that many opportunities.
Is that specific to space industry? Because we've seen all these big yeah.
We've seen that in aviation. It's specific to deep tech.
Okay.
VCs in Paris are not used to that. BPI is not putting money in these VCs right now to invest in deep tech. It's coming, but it's not ready yet. And even the large VCs in Paris that can sign big checks are not ready to commit to deep tech. That's what we see. And then we have entrepreneurs that not like Loft Orbital have difficulties to export themselves. If you can't raise in Paris, then just go to London or go to Geneva or Amsterdam or elsewhere. As long as you keep the money somehow clean, you can raise it anywhere, and that's okay, at least for the first comers. And that's what we are still struggling with in Paris and in France.
Pierre Damien, you now based. You live basically. You live in the Silicon Valley, right? Is that from what we just had from Francois? Do you agree with that? And do you have the feeling that since you moved to Silicon Valley, things have changed in France and in Europe as a whole?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the first comment would be things have moved really fast all across the globe, right? Including in France, including in Silicon Valley, and everywhere. I think the comment that we're late is, we're falling behind when we look at the US, or I would say Silicon Valley in particular, is certainly funded, but I don't think it's as bad as we would make it sound. What I would say is I think we have all the elements to catch up, and yeah, absolutely. And I would look at this from a different perspective, right? The first one is, or different angle. The first one is talent, right? So, do we have skilled engineers, skilled executive to be able to create, innovate in the space industry? And I mean, the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, we're a US-based company, right? And when we decided to open an office in France, and we have now a full company in France, the reason was, in a large part, the ability to attract some of the best talent in the world. The French engineers are some of the best in the world, and that's absolutely true. So we just need to put them in a company, in a configuration where they can actually deploy that talent and scale, right? The second thing is, I think France is actually one of the best countries to create a startup in. We have, when we moved into France, we've been massively supported by BPI and all the regional ecosystem, whether it is in the Occitanie region in Toulouse, or all the kind of like support and tax relief and all those kind of things that are pretty unique in France, right? So it's actually very capital efficient to start a company in France. Of course, when you get later in the game and you've grown and you're now hundreds of employees in France, and now you're spending a lot because you have like all those high overhead on them. But I think that's fair, right? Like, for the French government to attract companies to start here, make it very easy for them to start as long as they don't have capital. And when they've raised like hundreds of millions of dollars, now you have a workforce in France. So I think that strategy is really good. And I think the barrier to entry to start a company in France is very low, right? If you look at Silicon Valley, I mean, salaries are like crazy high. Competition to raise capital is extremely high, right? Everybody is like Stanford MBA, MIT PhD, 5 years of Google, 10 years at Palantir, and like you're competing against this, right? So it's really hard to start something in Silicon Valley compared to France. But I would agree with Francois, which is like, you can start in France and raise like 1 million, 10 million, that's fine. But when it gets to raising 100 million, $1 billion, that's more difficult, right? That's why, I mean, for us, we're based in the US, we're based in Silicon Valley. We are attached to the Silicon Valley ecosystem where we can raise, those kind of like multi-$100 million rounds. And then we can actually, deploy the capital efficiently in France with growing the team there and things like this. So, I think space is international in general. Loft in particular is very international, and I think we offer some attractive opportunities for people who want to work in space in France. but be also tied to a global ecosystem, being tied to a US company. And I think there are more and more companies that will do that, right? So, I think we just have to realize the strengths and weaknesses of both ecosystems. And to me, there are many strengths in France, right? The scalability is certainly the main issue. And for us, the way to do that is to, also have, an office established in the US, right? That's how we solved that. That's the main point. But you can tell there are more and more initiatives. I think François mentioned the plan from Macron. Like you do have more and more initiatives to develop more and more things in France. But I also think that as long as people think about it as a French initiative and a French thing, it's doomed to fail, right? Like the world is not France or a location. So you have to think about it in a very global fashion.
Thank you, Pierre-Damien. Once again, I would like to turn to the audience and really ask your questions if you have any thoughts or questions or anything. Otherwise, you'll have to listen to my very naive questions, and I have a very naive question for you guys. What exactly do we need space for? I mean, you mentioned that would also be a very interesting answer to have on what can you manufacture, what in space. You mentioned that, I think it was François. So what do we need, for communications, for of course military purposes and so on. But today, what is available up there and that we really need to reach, and what are the main applications of space today?
Yeah, I can start, and maybe Pierre-Damien, you can add on. But space, started as a battle war between the US and Russia. It's still a competition. It's still who will owns the moon, who will owns more resources, who will spy on the other, and still in that range. Right now, we've seen a rise interest for space. Mostly because the US and China are competing in that area. It's not Russia, it's China. China has made some huge progress and has landed on the moon, as you know, making more experiments, and that's why the US, they want to go back quickly to the moon, to send people to make sure that the moon does not become an annex of China. But if you take that military, or political aspect of space, most of the television before cable was coming from space. A lot of communication are coming from space. Weather is coming from space, et cetera, et cetera. And we are seeing two trends. And one that I think is very interesting, we are talking about, manufacturing in space, but basically, again, to work on the climate change, if we can bring to space, everything that pollutes on Earth, if we can manufacture more in space and then bring back to Earth, I don't know how it's going to be possible, but that's the main idea. The computing farm that needs so many resources, so many power on Earth. How can we bring that, the cloud in space, computing power in space, so you don't have to cool them down? What else can you manufacture in space that would reduce CO2 emission? That's one of the big challenge to leverage space and to make Earth cleaner.
Also, when you talk about putting it in space, what disturbs us on the Earth, there's also this big debate on these new constellations will also bring some kind of visual pollution, because you won't be able to see the stars. There's some kind of concern about that. Is that also something you're concerned about, or do you think it's a false debate?
I think at some point, if you launch 300,000 satellites, it's going to be annoying. The sky will be full of satellites, and stars will be less accessible. But right now we are putting telescope in space, so we don't have that issue. And then for your eyes, if you're really passionate about stars, I think you're still going to be able to see them, but in a different way. It's not one of my main concerns, but
Pierre-Damien, can you tell us more about these new applications of space that we can find up there?
For sure, and maybe as François was thinking, as okay, how do you try to find a good way to make this closer to everyone's reality when not everyone is thinking about satellites every day. And so if as a very French person, if you walk through like the day in the life of a French person, like you wake up, you're gonna go in a car to go to work, where the first thing you do is that car, and basically every piece of furniture in your house, maybe it's IKEA or something else, has been built in a different country, transported, and without satellites today, you wouldn't have any supply chain, you wouldn't have any aviation, right? Like there would be no aircraft, there would be none of that. So that's done. And then you go in your car, you look at the weather forecast, weather is coming from satellites. You're using Google Maps, right? Or sorry, any other maps application, and that's coming from GPS data, right? Let's say after work you're going to get some wine and cheese in a bar, right? Well, the wine that you're drinking has been grown from grapes that were harvested based on data from satellite, right? You look at from satellite, you can tell when the grapes have enough sugar and moisture content to be harvested, right? So that's one thing. You're gonna get like some cheese where the cheese was transported on container that needed to stay cold during the entire transportation, where you have sensors in those containers that transmit the temperature real time during the entire transportation through satellites, because you have multimodal transportation. So you cannot use the same mode of communication on the ground when you go from like train, ships, aircraft in different countries. There is no single communication that works except satellites. And then you're going to pay for this wine and cheese. So you're going to pay with your card, right? Any Visa or MasterCard transaction in the world is using clock synchronization from satellites. So without satellites, there is no more ATM. Like you cannot withdraw cash at any cash machine. You cannot pay with a credit card anywhere. That's gone, right? Then you're going to watch, like, I don't know, a soccer game or a rugby game if you're going to lose. And you're going to watch this on TV. And maybe that's in a different country and you're watching this live. Well, this feed is coming from the stadium to your actual TV through satellites, right? So all those are kind of like mundane application that you don't really realize, but like literally every time you go to a cash machine or you pay a transaction at a bar, like that goes through a satellite. Otherwise, you would have to pay in cash. And then the other big application, right, less mundane, less like day in the life of a French person, is more, climate change, security. So worldwide security, there would be no defense, no army today without satellite periods. And cloud infrastructure in space, right? So I think those like large nuggets are relying on space today. And all those small things that you don't really know you use, to me, is interesting, and maybe people don't realize it, and I thought that was interesting to bring up.
Good question from Nicholas, following up on what we just said, the technical and cost challenges that the industry will have to face. Of the main challenges on that side. Can you, one of you guys would like to answer that?
Maybe I can take that quickly. So and that's maybe the bias of Loft here, because that's why we started this company. But to us, or just my bias is to say that 90% of the cost and the challenges that you have in space is because you have to do design, right? Every time you have to design a new satellite from scratch, so it costs a fortune. Think about if, like, when you wanted to drive from like Paris to Toulouse, you would have to go to, I don't know, Renault or Peugeot and ask them to design a car that meets your specification, right? Maybe they would take 3 years to design the car, like they do today. They would take 2 years to build the tooling to then manufacture your car, and they would manufacture your car in one single copy, right? That car would take like 5-7 years to come in. You would have like tens of thousands of people at Renault worked on this. So that car costs you like, $500 million. And this car is the same that you can buy at the dealership for like $20,000. The difference is the customization. And in space, for some reason, it has been decided that everything has to be custom made. So every time you want to drive from Paris to Toulouse, you would have to design a new car and use it. And this car is built in one copy. So to me, like, that is the biggest financial challenge. And this is also indirectly the biggest technical challenge, because you need an army of aerospace engineers to design, verify, validate, test, a new satellite. So the way we are trying to change that paradigm is by saying that makes no sense. Like literally, I don't know any industrial rates like this except space. So what we're going to do is just take satellite off the manufacturing line. So think SpaceX, think OneWeb, think any of those like very large initiatives. Take the satellite off the manufacturing line. So it's built in like hundreds of thousands of copy, or hundreds of copy or thousands of copy, and we just build whatever is needed to be able to plug and play anything on it and ship it and launch it. So we don't need to develop satellite. We don't need to design satellite anymore every time, right? And to me, like that, at least that's our vision, and that's how we are solving that problem. But from a more general standpoint, I think as long as we're staying in the custom-made, one-off, produced in one copy, that will always be expensive and long. Like that's true of any industry. That has nothing to do with space, right? If to use a phone, you would have to have your phone built in one copy. It would be ludicrous. Like I don't know, it costs billions of dollars. Right? But the $20 billion of investment made by Apple into developing the best chip and the best thing for your phone is amortized because they're selling like 1 billion of those phones. So to me, it all comes down to turning the aerospace industry from a design and one-off custom industry to a production scale industry.
Francois, you see that the same way?
Yeah. For the satellite part, what we've seen with SpaceX and others is that the cost to go to space has really reduced by 10, and then maybe by another factor of 10, and that was in the past that was the main challenge. Access to space was very, very expensive. You couldn't launch a satellite for less than 200 or 300 million. Now you can launch something for maybe 20 million, and it's gonna go down more and more, and that's gonna change everything. With Starship, they're gonna be able to launch a 100-ton into low Earth orbits for probably 10 million. So that's a game changer. And then when you start to have more space station where you can manufacture things, then you don't have to manufacture the satellites on Earth and put them through the entire launch and start and vibration and thermal and everything, but you can start manufacturing them in space, and then you don't have to design them the same way. They don't have to be structured and so rigid and be able to cope with all kind of vibration. So even the design of the satellite will change. Whether it's industrialized, whether it's shared, of course that's a very good point. But when you start manufacturing these things in space, then the design is much simpler. And so, but basically, we are just at the beginning of a new era where we're going to see things changing by a huge order of magnitude. And to come back maybe to the last question, to the previous questions, what we've seen, and as the cost to space is reduced, we've seen more and more countries want to access to space. And we've seen the Emirates launching an astronaut last year or 2 years ago to the space station. And we would not have thought of this, just a few years ago. We've seen Korea who wants to develop their own GPS system. That's new. It took Europe 20 years to develop Galileo. Now, just a small country like Korea, they want their own GPS to be, fully autonomous. Space has become a place where sovereignty is a key element. Qatar, for example, they want their own, communication satellites, network. So they are not going to be spied by the US or by China, or they want their communication to be private, and so on and so on. So in the past, we used to have 5 and then 7 space country capable of building rockets, sending astronauts, that type of things. Tomorrow, there's going to be 50 who want to have access to the same capabilities. So as a result, volume will go up, cost will go down, and then new type of service will be accessible.
And it's interesting to see that from what we understand, space has become a commodity in a way. And when I was a child, I remember I wasn't born when the first man landed on the moon. have gray hairs, but not that old. But it was still an adventure. I mean, going to space. We didn't talk a lot about inhabited flights. I mean, bringing humans to space. There's, always some humans now turning around the Earth in the International Space Station. But is that also something that will, in the coming years, be more? I mean, we of course there are these experiences with the Jeff Bezos company, who, it's a space tourism. I don't know if there's a future in there or not. But what will you need humans up there for? I mean, is there also, that's another question, is there a meaning? Is there something to do on Mars? Is it, I mean, reasonable to have people, such a long flight, but for what purpose?
Yeah, lots of great question here. Well, I think on the manned space flights, so having people in space, I mean, obviously to me, and I think to everybody, this is like the most exciting things you could do, right? That's why it's inspirational. That's why it's like really cool. So of course, we'd love to see more of that. I think, Europe had made the decision, I think something like 30 years ago, to not develop capabilities to transport people into space. So Europe doesn't have the capability, and very few nations in the world have that capability, actually. And now, again, we're talking about SpaceX. SpaceX just did a mission called Inspiration 4. And we didn't talk about it too much in the news, and I was surprised. That was like amazing. Like that was a dream. Like when, 10 years ago when I was younger and I was at the X Prize Foundation, that was really the beginning of space tourism, right? And we're working with companies that eventually became Virgin Galactic, Space Adventures, and things like this, that are companies that are launching people into space nowadays. But back in the day, that was almost taken as a joke, right? So to see today, like the Inspiration 4 mission for SpaceX, where you had like 4, tourists, so to say, like purely civilians, not trained astronauts, going around the Earth for like quite some time and then coming back. That was just absolutely incredible. And to me, that's really the beginning of this happening way more often. I think there is this perception in general that, this is just for like rich people because it's really expensive. And right now this is very true. But I also think that if you look at any other industry, that was the case. Like aviation, started with it was very, very expensive. Very few people could do this. Nowadays, everybody can. And so you always need like the wealthy individual at the beginning to pay a huge price to pay for the cost of like development and get things in space, like get the routine, get the volume. And once you have that, then the price decreases and then it's available for the masses. So that's why, to me, the fact that right now it's limited to a few wealthy individuals is just the normal step of any industry that gets developed. People always pay more at the beginning to get into something. It was something for Tesla and things like this. Now, I think the next question is, okay, but like, it's very inspirational. That's great. But like, why do we care? Like, why do we need to have people in space? Why do we want to have people in space? And that's a different level of question. To me, I actually kind of like you always have those, those meme of like the dinosaurs on the planet and you see the asteroids coming in and, that's it for them. And there has been life on this planet for billions of years. There has been humans on this planet for, a bit less than that. But there has been the capability for a living being on this planet to get outside this planet for 70 years, right? Out of like the tens of thousands of years where you had human beings and the millions or billions of years where you had other beings on this planet. So for all we know, there are no other intelligent life anywhere near us. And we know the planet will get extinct at some point, right? The sun will blow up. Like in the future, that's it. And so if this is the only place there is life on Earth, I think there is some kind of responsibility to try to populate the universe with life, I guess, in some way. And the window to do that has been opened something like 50 years ago, which is like so short. And we don't know for how long that window will last, right? Because maybe there will be some cataclysmic events in 200 years that makes intelligent life extinct or something like this. And so there was maybe this, in the whole lifetime of the universe, maybe there would be just this short period of time where life had a chance to like actually expand in the universe. And the only living being on this planet who can do that is like, mankind. So I think to say there is some responsibility to be able to make sure life can become multiplanetary, I think is, to me, that's an argument that I can hear. And that gets me excited. But that's maybe more like that becomes more like a personal thing.
François, you want to follow up on that?
On my side, I don't really get, the go to Mars thing. I'm not. I don't know if we need to colonize Mars and make it a secondary planet for Earth. At least in the near future, I see the interest for the Moon, or at least having a base not far from Earth, where we that we use to mine some asteroids, bring some new type of minerals and then the rare earth type of
Could you
products.
store things on the moon, for instance?
There's so on the moon there. Well, yeah. There's a lot of ice, and so there's a lot of water. You can use that as a propellant. You can use oxygen as to breathe, and hydrogen as a propellant. So there's a story to set up a base on the moon. That's for sure. But then, does it make sense to be on the moon, or to just be in a low Earth orbit with a big, international space station? Who knows? I still believe that space tourism is a niche. But on the other side, what I think is what SpaceX is doing, and I think we don't talk enough about that, is that they are transforming a rocket and a rocket engine into an airplane. Their rockets and their engine are being reused, 10 times and soon 100 times. They are being used really as a jet engine, and that's something that you can reuse. You don't have to throw your engine into the garbage once you use it once. And behind space tourism, what they're really targeting is the London to Tokyo in 90 or 60 minutes. That's the real end game that we should see much before having a base on Mars.
That was probably the very first mission of NASA. I mean, to explore space, find new planets, so that once this one is totally spoiled, that we can move the population somewhere else, or if the Earth was endangered. I guess this is totally over, right? We're not these missions are not really. There's not the intention of really moving a part of the Earth population somewhere else, on Mars or the Moon, whatever, to create colonies. Or what do you think?
Right now, if we would have to send people to Mars for 6 months, I think either they would die because of the solar radiations, or their genital organs will be damaged, so they would not be able to reproduce themselves. So there's still a lot of questions for long term flight into space, despite the need for a high level of energy. And until we find this engine like ITAR, based on nuclear propulsion, where if we can make them work, you will be able to go to Mars in 7 days. Until we find that type of propulsion, I think it's illusional to think that we can go to another planet and start our civilization again.
And can you dream of a really, a strong international cooperation in that field? I mean, since you mentioned ITER, in that field, there's really an international cooperation between countries, superpowers that usually don't really go along too well. Could you also imagine that in space? I mean, because we've talked about Europe, we've talked about the US. China, maybe also India could be part of the game. What is the role of India right now, and how do all these people go along? I mean,
yeah, right now, because of the rise of the tension rising between the US and China, it's hard to see and to look at an international cooperation for space. Again, we have better use of our time trying to use space as a way to protect the planet than trying to escape the planet. So we should do everything we can to put in space what's polluting on the planet, better monitoring it, better understand the weather, that type of things. Then trying to cooperate on the escape thing. And then if you look at India, right now India is pretty much the US ally. They are fighting with China also on the border. There's a couple of places in the Himalaya where they disagree on the borders. India has stopped a couple of major Chinese apps. So India is pretty much fighting China almost as strongly as the American. And in India, they have their own rocket that is working quite well. We have invested in a couple of their startups. There's a couple of other startups trying to build launchers. So they are active. It's also a huge country like China, a little bit behind on some aspect, but we're going to definitely see them rising in the near future.
Pierre-Damien, you want to add something? Or?
Yeah, I think I would certainly feel a little bit differently. I think to me the mindset of international collaboration for those kind of projects. I mean, while this is great and we have the ISS and that's a fantastic collaboration project, in many ways I think that time is maybe a bit behind us, because that was a time where only governments could do things. So even the way we're presenting the question, right, I think the way we present the question is flawed, because we're presenting the question as like collaboration between government and governments, and that's completely ignoring the fact that most of the innovation may not, or most of the programs may not come from governments, right? If you look at just the top 10 companies in the world, each of them have more capital than like France, right? They literally have more money than France. So okay, like thinking that it's going to be a government to government thing only, I think is flawed. I think the thinking that we should have an international body that regulates all activities is very appealing, very interesting, and certainly very necessary. But to me, this is about coordination, regulation, and things like this. This is not about actually developing something. And when we talk about manned spaceflight, I think at the same time, I think I agree and I disagree with you, Francois. Like, is there any need to go to like Mars with human beings? No. But to some extent, is there any need to have some people going to the moon? No. All the application we mentioned can probably be done by robotization. So to me, like, either needs, in many ways the answer is no. That's more like a almost like philosophical question. Like, either we need to explore, either we need to go somewhere else. And by doing this, we will develop and find new things that will be so important for us. Like, I always take the example of the Apollo missions, right? We went to the moon because we thought it was important at the time for different reasons. If we didn't have the Apollo program, there would be no computers today, right? Maybe not that bad.
Remember how the Apollo program, emerged. It was the race, between Russia and the US. It was a political race. If you look at the International Space Station right now, China is not allowed to go to that, space station. Yeah, and even the Russian, there's 3 cosmonauts, and they are just allowed to stay in their own module. They are not allowed to go elsewhere in the space station. So even the space station is not that international, and only a few countries can decide whether people are allowed to go there or not. And so, yeah, and again, the space is rising right now because of the tension with China. Of course, we don't need to go to the moon, but if China decided that the moon is part of China and that it's going to give them a competitive advantage, for because of the resource on the moon on Earth, then it's becoming a threat. Then the US are against that, and then they're going to fight on the moon or in space. But you're right. There's no need except tension rising between 2 countries.
Yeah. No, that I would agree, and that's probably going to be a driver for a number of things. I guess my point was, I'm always sometimes baffled when people talk about international as like something that is big and weird and like, oh, it has to happen. To me, like, I don't know, we're like less than 100 people. We have more than 20 nationalities in the team. We have offices in multiple countries. Like, what does it mean international? Like, for Google or for like, any large organization, take Amazon, like, what does international means? Like, they have offices in every country in the world. So if as a company they decide to do something, like, what kind of, it's not a government or something. It is international by nature because they are everywhere in the world.
Yeah, you don't have an office in China. We are not allowed to have an office in China. I don't know about you, but we cannot, operate out of Shanghai or Beijing. We cannot, deal with Chinese corporates.
But you're taking
that's a fact.
That is true, but at the same time, you're taking, to me, so I think you are completely correct, but to me, this is somewhat irrelevant because this is a short-term thing. Take like 50 years ago, it would have been Russia versus US. Now it's maybe US versus China. In 20 years, it might be like Brazil versus India. Who knows? Like those are just at a scale that is tens of years, right? But I think the trend that is way longer than those tens of years is not the government relationship between one and the other. It's just the fact that there are organizations that survive those tensions.
No, but for the next 10 years, we're going to see tension between the US and China, if not a war, at least strong tension in the Chinese Sea, and we need to cope with that. We need to adapt and adjust our business. The US military budget is going to go from 700 billion to 1.2 trillion, for example, just because of this tension. And when you look at space right now, it's mostly funded by NASA and the Space Force. Once Starlink will be up and running, it will be more commercial communication. But right now, SpaceX contract. If you look at government contract that SpaceX is gaining compared to the amount that they're raising, they are still getting more money from the government than the money that they are raising. And even Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin is fighting hard to get NASA contract for the moon lander because that's still government money, and that's going to allow him to raise money on the outside market. So
you're completely right. I guess I was taking the angle more from the manned space flight, people in space, approach. Everything you're talking about, I would completely agree. But to me, that's not, it's like security, tension, geopolitical, defense, security, which is to me a little bit less inspiring. And all of that does not require man in space. And actually, probably none of that includes flying people in space, right? So from that angle, I think if we don't take the angle of like, how about people in space? I think you're completely right.
Well, it's interesting to see that, following up on Nicolas' question earlier on the biggest issues and challenges that the industry has to face. They're not a question of cost or techniques or technology. It's more like diplomatic and political issues that the industry has to face, right? And I'm afraid, guys, we're quite near the end of our session. It was really interesting. I didn't see the time pass go by. It was great. Maybe Anne-Emmanuelle wants to add something or ask a few more questions, but I think we'll have to wrap up in a few minutes. Anne-Emmanuelle, if you can join us on the screen, on the stage.
Hi, everyone. Hi again. I'm not going to ask any more questions because I guess it's going to prompt long answers, and unfortunately we're out of time. But clearly the topic is fascinating, and we could probably go on for hours. And I was happy to see, we started with GPS and weather forecast and how to mine maybe rare earth on the moon and stuff. So we can definitely see all the opportunities and then all the challenges with the political and ethical issues. So again, it's fascinating things, and I'm glad that we could unravel some of the trends this morning. Well, I'd like to thank everyone because I really think we're running out of time. Thank you very much, François and Pierre Damien, for joining us today. And thank you, Phil, for moderating this session. I'd just like to add a last word about our next episode that will be in 2 weeks on November 17th. And the topic will be quite different because it will be about VC and funds and what are the post-COVID trends. Although there might be a link because we talked quite a bit about funding this morning as well. So maybe there is a slight link, but it will be about VC and funds. So thank you very much, everyone, once again. And also, again, thank you to our sponsor, Bank of the West, for helping us putting this together this morning. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.